Morning, folks. Welcome. It's going to be a packed panel this morning because we have got a very big subject. We are exploring the role of the creative industries to power up our rural economies. Wow, and we've got 45 minutes to do it in, so we're going to rattle through this quite quickly, I think, but really big subject, but a really, really important one because the creative industries, creative sector is one of the fastest growing sectors in the world. And in a world that is rapidly changing, growing, developing, the skills, knowledge, experience that the creative industries can offer so much to our rural businesses, communities, people. So, all big words and big claims, but what exactly do we mean by that? Well, I have got a very experienced panel here with me today who are going to help us get to the nub of the matter. So I'm going to introduce them now. To my left, I've got to get all of this right. I'm going to refer to my notes. Loman Campbell, got that bit right already. Musician, producer, studio owner, BAFTA-winning songwriter, Scottish Album of the Year Award shortlister, and based just down the road in Achafubel.
Yes.
Woohoo, got it right. My mother will be proud, where you spend a lot of your time making music and also machines, which we're going to come back to in a minute. One of the surprising things about everybody on this panel is that there are lots of surprising things about them. So here we go. We've now got Isabel.
Well done.
Isabel Henry, designer of luxury leather accessories and a passion for traditional craft skills, sustainability, sustainable approaches, and hailing from
Loch Carron.
which is where I grew up as well. Beauty of the Highlands and Islands community, so I'm a bit nervous about the stories that Isabel might have, but anyway, we won't get into those just now. And finally, we also have a professor, Professor Simon McCarroll, Professor of Media, Music, Head of Media and Journalism at Glasgow Caledonia University, but not only that, an expert on the pipes. I have got that bit right, haven't I?
Yeah. Well, I'm not so expert these days, but I'm still playing.
Are we going to get a show today?
No.
Oh. Anyway, you've taught, you've performed throughout the world, and you've recorded 12 commercial albums, okay? That's pretty impressive.
In the dim and distant past.
Right, okay. And then there's me. Originally, I was just going to be on the panel, but Ian Hamilton over there, Head of Creative Industries, has asked me to step in. So just to let you know a little bit more about me, as I said, I grew up on the West Coast. I was a program maker. I used to work with the BBC and I've made digital content and all that kind of stuff. And now I run a business called Strategy Story, which, funnily enough, really helps businesses create their strategies and their stories. And it's that latter part that I'm especially interested in. And I really put down to my Highlands and Islands roots. But before we get into the panel and what we're going to discuss, the first rule in storytelling is know your audience. So we would like to know a little bit more about you folks sitting here. I think we've got about 60, 70 people here and then another 100 online. But the people in the room, we're really interested in who you are and where you're from. So can we get a show of hands for folk in creative industries? How many folk? I'm expecting there's going to be quite a few. Who's good with numbers on the panel? How many have we got there? What percentage would you say of the room? 80, 90? Any other industries, food and drink? 1. Hello. Tourism, and yep. It's the beauty of the Highlands and Islands, isn't it? You need more hands. Any other industries I've missed? And then we've got some public agencies in the room as well. What have I missed? Sorry. Pardon?
Software development.
Software development.
Up here as well.
And then who else have we missed? What we got? Who's that, Loman? Sorry, I'm picking on you. You've got to say where you.
It's forestry for me.
Forestry? Wow. What are you hoping to get out of today's panel then?
I'm creating temporary fencing kits and I'm looking to get good digitized content for my new company.
Excellent, thank you. Well, I hope you get something successful out of today. Very interesting. Another quick question. How far have people travelled? Who's come less than 10 miles? Show of hands. All right. Who's come up 50 miles? How far have you travelled? 50 miles. Yeah. Anyone over 50 miles? Yeah, see, that's the thing. So, okay, we better be good. All right, I've picked on you lot enough now, so I'm going to start to pick on these folk a bit. So let's start with a couple of really good examples of people living and working in the region creatively. Ishbel and Lomond. First of all, hardest question first of all, what do you do, Ishbel, and why are you here?
So I design and make leather accessories mostly. I also dabble in a bit of woodwork. And I went to Glasgow School of Art, spent about 7 years in Glasgow and moved up home, I think 5 years ago now, probably 5 years ago this month. And it was the best decision I made. I think at the time it felt a bit like potential career suicide, leaving kind of the bustling creative heart of Glasgow. But it was really what my heart wanted. I mostly just missed the hills. That's kind of where my passion lies. And I really loved that line in the video you showed earlier about kind of mountaintop being your worktop or workspace. And that's really how I feel. I feel I have so much more soul in my creative work when I live and have the work-life balance that I want. So yeah, it's been an amazing move for me, and my creative business started really when I moved home. There was a massive shift, and I launched my business in 2020, which obviously was lockdown, not an amazing time, but a beautiful thing came out of it. And yeah, I can't imagine doing what I do now if I didn't live where I do, which is in Wester Ross in Loch Arran on the northwest coast. So yeah, it's been a really beautiful kind of transition for me, and I feel lucky to have experienced both the hustle and bustle of Glasgow and that kind of difference. I don't actually think it's a quiet lifestyle. I think it is still bustling. I work harder than I ever did in Glasgow, but it's just different. The pace of life is slightly different, and it suits me and it suits my practice really well.
Thank you so much. We've got a video to see of your work as well. Should we play that just now?
Okay.
Are we ready with that video, guys? Great, thanks very much.
I'm Isabel Hendry, and I'm a textile designer maker based in the Scottish Highlands. I've been working with leather since 2013, and I spent the last 3 years creating a collection of hand-woven leather accessories. I don't think I'd be doing what I do if I didn't live in the Highlands. It's kind of all intrinsically tied together. The colours on the hills and the light, things like that are just so inspiring. The fact that kind of the colours change in veg tan leather over time really kind of mirrors the landscape here. My craft is all about slowing down and detail. And I think when I'm out running or walking, it is about slowing down and taking a step back from day-to-day life. Materials really matter. I use a combination of vegetable tanned leather and cotton. Not only are these materials natural, but they're also hard wearing. Vegetable tanned leather takes in those scratches and marks and really makes them your own. And I think that'd be amazing at the end of that life, that it's totally yours and it looks completely different to someone else who's bought the same bag as you. My wee bags celebrate true craftsmanship, skill, quality, and the real value of making. This is the launch of my first ever collection, and I hope you'll be part of my story.
That's absolutely beautiful. Such a beautiful film, and we're going to come back to some more elements of your story throughout the next 40 minutes. But we're going to move to Lomond now to hear a little bit more and throw that question at you. Why are you here? Tell us a bit more about your work and why are you here?
The decision was kind of made for me to move here because it just become really prohibitive to live in Edinburgh. This was in 2014. It was just becoming... It got to the point where it was more sensible to buy a dilapidated primary school in a tiny little place called Acafubble than it was to stay in Edinburgh and rent. So that's where I live now. And actually, interestingly enough, the first scene on the first video you saw was Acafubble, which was a happy accident. But it's a great place to keep your overheads down and to have the space and time to work. And I totally agree with what you're saying about not really slowing down the sort of amount that you work, but just having the opportunity to work that amount is really great. And what I do is I make music, and I also make kind of sound installation type machines, and I have a recording studio. So I often invite people up to record, or people get in touch with me and come and we'll do little projects. But it's a great space. It's called The Lengths, and it's as I said, it's a former 1960s primary school, so it's very modernist type building. But yeah, I've been here since then, and it's not slowed me down in any way in being creative and being able to make a living, and it's been a great move actually.
Do you think it's really helped evolve your work as well? Has there been a lot about the region that's helped develop your practice?
Yeah, it's certainly influenced my work. I mean, you'll see, I think we're going to show a little video, so you'll see in some of them how the environment has, and you just have to adapt. You just have to change how you work. And I think some of the albums that have been produced at the lengths could only have been produced at the lengths. And I'm not saying that in a kind of bold way. I think it's just a certain type of environment will bring out a certain type of sound. And yeah. If you ever listen to Catherine Joseph's album that was nominated for Scottish Album of the Year award, that was recorded at the lengths. And it's really confessional and sort of intimate and raw. And I don't think she could have done that in a commercial studio, you know. I think she would have to come somewhere where she felt really safe and secure and had a certain vibe. So I think rural places can offer that for the creative process.
Well, that's great, and also rural places offer, as we know, lengthy journeys, because some of you have travelled quite far, so it means that lots of people can download that album and listen to it on the way home as well.
Do it,
and hear what you're talking about. Great, thanks. Simon, let's have a wee chat with you now, because rural areas, creative industries is a huge focus of your work. Why is that so important to you?
Well, my interest, particularly in rural Scotland, came out of some work initially that had started in 2015-16 in Argyll. And I think what that work showed me at the time was, and that was on music as well, that there were some really thorny issues to deal with, but some huge advantages to making music, making a career in rural areas, and how we support those people. So fast forward several years, and I think after the pandemic, not to talk about the pandemic, but that has accelerated a lot of digitalisation that was happening pre-pandemic. So my view now is that actually working and living in the Highlands and Islands for many artists and makers is actually potentially is probably never been a better time in the modern era to do that, because, you know, as other people are saying already, housing costs are lower, broadband has vastly improved right across the Highlands and Islands. Still lots of areas where it's a problem, but even in island communities now, there's people are able to actually connect with each other, and in numerous other ways. And the big thing I think that interests me at the heart of it is actually the Highlands and Islands themselves, historically, naturally, and as a place, have actually really emerged with the digitalisation of the sector as a real asset, actually, for a lot of people who are making things, making music, and that can have a digital presence. So it's a fantastic area to work in, you know.
Simon, great, thank you. It's a brilliant introduction for what we're going to get into shortly. But let's touch on the point of making there and go back to Lomond and see that video that shows some of your work as well, so we can kind of bring to life what we're talking about here. Thanks. Wow. Walk us through that, Loman. That's so impressive. What have we just watched there? What's the story behind it?
Yeah, so some of them are like machines that I've built that are kind of music projects. So, for example, the one with the wheels on it with the letters, you dial in words and it sort of converts that to sound. And then the one with the pendulums it's actually a 19th century scientific device for illustrating mathematical harmony called a harmonograph. And I made a musical one, so the pendulums triggered sounds as well. And there's a tape looping machine that I built for a guy called Kenny Anderson, a musician. And then some of it's just music videos that I've made. For my music, you'll see there's quite a bit of the environment in there. So effectively, the way I have to kind of get over the distance of not being part of a scene in Edinburgh or Glasgow or Leeds or wherever, is to sort of put my stuff online, because it's a nice way of letting people know that you're there. But in order to do so, you have to have something to talk about and something to show. So I spend quite a lot of time making my own music videos or making machines and just trying to get interest that way. And it's kind of ramped up since lockdown, which was a very great period for me. I loved lockdown, it was amazing. Because I was able to just stay at home and do all these projects that I'd wanted to do for years but never had the time to do it. So that's the kind of thing that I do.
Well, let's just pick up on lockdown actually, because and something that Simon's just mentioned earlier there as well, because that really was a massive disruptor, catalyst as well in some ways for the creative industries, particularly in the field of digital and pioneering and innovating new ways of delivering what we're doing in creative industries. Can you talk to me a little bit more about some real life examples of how that really moved things on and how that can actually, the theme of of today obviously is how creative industries can help rural economies. What can we learn from what we learned in COVID, how we changed things that could potentially help other sectors, other businesses? Let's go to the professor first of all. Back to Simon.
Okay. Well, there's myriad things happening already. So for instance, take music tuition. So that's been transformed over the last 5 or 6 years. And so for instance, just for an example, High Life Highland, who deliver instrumental and vocal tuition across the Highlands and Islands, have doubled the number of kids taking lessons using remote technology. So there's schools that traditionally would never have been able to have a visit from an expert music instructor, now get those lessons online weekly and a monthly in-person visit. The actual capitalisation or essentially the use of the landscape in the Highlands and Islands is something I think that's really beginning to kind of bear fruit now. So there's new revenue streams now. So for instance, for some bigger artists, so on, if they can mobilise the landscape of the Highlands and Islands and the history and the heritage and the culture in the same way that Isabel does, for instance, that actually provides them now with new forms of revenue, new customers, and a much more globalised kind of setting for those, but not just musicians, but makers and people as well. There's that. There's all sorts of other ways in which digital economy is essentially making it more advantageous actually to be in rural areas and island communities as well than has ever previously been the case.
Well, can we just pick up on your point there about the new forms of revenue? Because I'm interested to drill down a little bit with Isabel and Lomond here about real life examples of actually how's that played out with your businesses and your creative industries businesses. How have you seen new forms of revenue coming in because of what we've been through really?
Yeah, I think for me it's quite difficult because I don't have a version of this story before lockdown. Yeah. So I started in 2020, but none of my forms of revenue would have come without digital. So I sell online mostly. I have 2 stockists, but they both found out about my work through, I think, Instagram, which is also how most of my customers heard about my work. So I rely solely on the internet for that, it's amazing. It's also, being a single person business, you have to have so many different kind of skills, which I love. I have like a creative side of myself and a business side of myself. So it allows me to kind of do both in a way that a traditional job, 9 to 5, doing a set role wouldn't. It gives me a very kind of whole experience, and I'm really grateful for that. But I would be interested to hear how that's changed for someone who had a business that was going, long before lockdown and that kind of digital push.
Well, for me, when lockdown happened, there's a sort of digital distribution site called Bandcamp, and they were really, really supportive, and they did a thing called Bandcamp Friday every month, where they would sort of forgo their fees, and you could sort of put stuff online, and it was a great idea, and people really supported it. So I think people were at home. They realised that the arts were really struggling, and if you put something up, something new, or maybe some old archive stuff you had every month, people would buy them, buy the records, and it made you super productive. But also, some of these machines, I posted one at the start of lockdown, and I got a record deal off the back of it. So it's like, it was really effective in being visible, because I think if I just posted an album, nobody would have been that interested, or it would have shut down the stream, super fast. But I think just when you've got things like that, it's got a point of difference, and that's one of the reasons I'm still making music, whatever it is, 3 years later, is because of the digital stuff that I did.
And are there any lessons in any of this for us about new audiences, new markets, how to reach them? Or Simon, that you might be picking up on something that I've just missed? So shoot, I can see you're desperate to get in.
The point I wanted to make was that, actually, if you look at the whole of Scotland in the UK, the Highlands and Islands is actually very well placed to capitalise on this. 23% of the Highlands and Islands are self-employed. There's double the number of people essentially who have two jobs. There's 6% in the Highlands and Islands, it's 3% across the Scottish economy. So there's already a culture in the Highlands and Islands of being multitaskers, being people that can do digital marketing, that can do the production itself, the retail of it, all the back end stuff. So I think what's really interesting in a way, though, is that we've got all this kind of pent-up opportunity, but there's not yet the collectivization, which is, I think, that you would see that would really support that. And I think there have been efforts to do that, but banding people together actually can help, whether it's purchasing materials, whether it's buying expertise, legal services, marketing, and so on, or in music, for instance, in the digital side of music and sync houses, distribution rights, and so on. These are areas, I think, where there's real opportunity, and because it's not traditionally been something that's done, then it's kind of difficult to kind of see somebody else doing it successfully do it. But they're doing it elsewhere in the world,
I would absolutely agree with your point there, particularly about entrepreneurialism and that being a nature of this region. It is a very creative region, very entrepreneurial. And I was in Glasgow. I lived in Glasgow for 16 years, which I loved, but my heart, I wanted to come back home. I wanted to raise my kids in the way that I was, I had that kind of upbringing. But equally, I knew that it's the kind of just the right environment for me, because my family have been like that. They've had different kind of jobs, they've made things work, they have to think creatively, and it's just the way it goes. And I think there's a real way that we organise in these rural areas as well that can be an exemplar for other rural areas and other businesses elsewhere. And so I'm doing a link into my own video now, because as part of our business, we really are there to support businesses in rural areas. And you might find that you're checking your tail shortly. There are some squirrels in the audience already. There might be a few more after this. I'm going to show you a video just now with my business partner, Professor Don McLean. So this is one of his concepts that he came up with after doing a lot of research in the Highlands and Islands about the way we organise. And now we help businesses do their storytelling and create their strategies around this. And I wonder how many people this is going to relate to. So can we play that wee video, please? Thanks.
I've spent a lot of my time around businesses and public sector organisations and in business schools teaching people about business. And really, there's only one game in town. Scale, big, profit maximising, mobile, anonymous, impersonal, equally unfair to everybody at its worst. And we're taught as though this is the way to behave in businesses. The fact of the matter is it just doesn't stack up with what I encounter, particularly in rural areas. And one of the reasons behind all this work is to try and present an alternative way of developing that takes into account the fact that we are different. I suddenly thought, well, it's a bit like the difference between grey squirrels and red squirrels. The grey is a bit of a machine. The red is definitely a community. Greys tend to be mobile, reds tend to be rooted in place. There's participants in place. Place is really important for them. Think of a whisky distillery, a fish farm, a farm itself, a tourist operator, a restaurant. They're all very local. Greys tend to be impersonal, quite formal. Reds are informal and highly personal. People are at the heart of the red squirrel business model. Reds are all about creativity and entrepreneurial behaviour, whereas greys are really about control and efficiency. Greys are in a hurry. They want maximum profits as soon as you can possibly deliver them. Reds are a bit more patient, they're resilient. It's a longer burn, slower process. There's a diverse ecosystem of organisations out there. There's nothing wrong with grey, but we have to, as Reds, get together and promote creativity to develop ourselves, but also, I think, to help develop a vibrant, inclusive and diverse rural social economy. So what do we do here? Well, if any of what you've heard has struck a chord with you, turn round, have a look at your tail. If you think you might be a red squirrel, get in touch. We'll get organised, form a movement.
So I'm just wondering, back to the panel, creative industries businesses in the rural economy, big themes that come through for us in our research is community, it's people. You know, is there anything in this that you're kind of picking up on and thinking, yes, that's us and we're a really good example and my work's a really good example of how we contribute to our community?
I mean, I'm probably a bit more of a loner just now, but in the past, when I first started doing music, I was really involved in the Fence Collective, who operated out of Anstruther and Crail around about sort of 2005, and they used to put an event on called Home Game, which was just a festival, and they took over the town, and it was an amazing thing to see because it really grew into something quite big, and everybody was getting involved. There was local bakers called Fisher and Donaldson that would get involved, and you would sort of build up these little relationships with these different sort of industries. And I mean, we ended up collaborating with Fisher and Donaldson actually on the world's first chocolate record, playable chocolate record.
Playable, that wouldn't last a second in my house.
Yeah, my mum ate the one that I gave her actually. But yeah, it was, and it was in the Guinness Book of Records.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
I want to see images of this later.
Yeah, and but yeah, so it was like, you know, just an example of sort of building friendships, and really, you know, economies thrive on great relationships. So yeah, that's a really good example. Johnny Lynch then went off to Egg and did the same thing up there with Lost Map, and that's really successful. You know, if you go to any of their events, it's kind of amazing the acts that he gets to come up to Egg. You know, it's really quite impressive, like international acts. He's running residencies up there, and again, it's all the community getting involved. They build like compost toilets, and they do food, and yeah, I know I'd probably rather do food, but you know. Yeah,
I know what I'd be picking.
But it's impressive. It's impressive to see, you know, given that Egg's pretty small, you know, I think it's like a population 120 or something like that. But actually, since he's moved there, it has grown. I think it was 70 or something when he moved there, and I think he has drawn attention to the place and brought people to the place through what he's done. So that's that I can think off the top of my head. That's a really great example.
So I want to just pick up on your point there, because I think that's the thing about creative industries as well. We can be smaller, we can work in isolation quite a lot, and actually being part of this community is a really big deal for us because it's quite easy to make meaningful connections. I say easy, it might not necessarily be easy, but it's part of our way of being, really. Ishbel, how important is that sense of community to you and what you do?
Yeah, it's so important. What was going through my mind when you were talking there, Lomond, is I recently had an exhibition in London, and for it I started working with wood alongside my leather work, which was inspired by my time doing traditional clinker boat building. I went to Plockton High School. Some of you might know that Plockton has a section of the high school called Ambata, which is a Gaelic for the boat. and we do traditional clinker boat building in your final year of school if you elect to do so. So I went back to my boat building workshop in my high school where they helped me, reuse the skills that I learned when I was 18 to create these steam bent sculptural works. And in doing so, I collaborated with it. Well, first of all, I had to get kind of forms to steam bend around. So my dad spoke to the local garage, who got in touch with the local fish farm, who got in touch with the director of the fish farm over in Kishorn, just over the hill, who helped me get one of these forms. And it just went on and on and on. And, you end up in someone's house having a cup of tea who you'd never met before, meeting their kids and their family. And it's just such an amazing, supportive community. And people just do it. And I just don't think I would have had that experience in Glasgow. I have tens of stories like that. The whole making process for me, which was about 4 months, included about 14 different people who the project just would not have been possible without. So community absolutely is just at the heart of what I do.
Excellent. Simon, you're
it just reminds me also of if you speak to promoters, music promoters who are working in the Highlands for festivals or for village halls or for larger venues, there's a really interesting aspect, which is that they essentially have an audience in place rather than in genre. So if you're a promoter in Leeds or Birmingham or Glasgow, then you'll have all the jazzers come to your jazz night, or all the indie people come to your night, the trad folk will go to your night. But if you're a promoter in the Highlands and Islands, then you have to be able to put things on for the whole community. So that affects the programming decisions, but it also affects the financial sustainability of these things. So the really successful festivals in the Highlands and Islands are hugely successful compared to their comparator festivals down south. So Belladrum, for instance, will sell out before they announce the acts. Yeah. There's no other music festival in the UK that will sell out before they announce the acts that are playing. But people are buying those tickets because they know that they will meet their friends there, that the whole family can go, and that it's a social event.
Yeah.
So that sense of being rooted in place, I think, is very important, not just for the social capital and people belonging, sense of belonging, but it's also now quite significant financially.
I really like what you're saying there as well, because it kind of touches on our work, because the Red Squirrel thing is also about looking at kind of perceived weaknesses or challenges of being in a remote or rural area and turning those on their head to actually be something that can turn into an opportunity or something really successful, which is essentially what you've said there, isn't it? It's like looking at what we've got and thinking, right, how do we make the most of this, And on that note, I'd like us to move on and spend a little bit of time talking about the story of the Highlands and Islands and how the creative industries can really help. So many of us are involved in businesses that help other businesses tell their stories, make content, design, whatever it might be. But how important is the creative industries to telling the story of the Highlands and Islands, and what more can we be doing in that space? Who will I pick on next? Who's not looking at me, Lomond? There you go.
I give you some pretty strong eye contact.
Yeah, what are you thinking about this one?
I don't know, it's a bit of a tough question, really. Can you repeat it?
What's the contribution of the creative industries to telling the story of the Highlands and Islands? Like, how far does your music spread, for example, and how important is that of kind of creating part of the story?
Well, I think it's difficult. I think it's pretty symbiotic, because the story is, so for me, whenever somebody talks about it, like if I get played on the radio, which isn't very often, but if it does happen, or I get a review or something, it's always Lomond Campbell from the Highlands, and it's always part of the story. I was baked in. So it's really helpful for me in terms of me telling a story about the Highlands. I don't know, I mean, like I say, they're hand in hand. So if people are talking about my work, then they tend to know that I'm up in the Highlands. It's a really, I guess it's a good example of somebody that's moved from a city to try and make it work and take a leap of faith and go somewhere that might be a bit more challenging to be a creative person. So yeah, I guess that, like I say, I just see it as a hand-in-hand thing.
And I think there's a really strong element there of, that when we're looking at if you want the brand or the story of a rural area and the Highlands Islands in particular, what it offers creative industries and people wanting to come and stay for longer or live here and work here, can help us bring in a new kind of tourist or a different kind of tourist or people who are going to stay for longer. There's really good examples. Are we good enough at telling our own stories in the creative industries? Are we good enough about getting our own story out there? Ishbel, what do you think?
So I would echo some of what you're saying actually there. I think almost all of the press I've had, which has, included national press, has really honed in on the fact that I'm in the Highlands, and what you were talking about, kind of taking disadvantages, like, maybe working alone and not having that creative network that's quite so available, totally flips on its head when you think about how much kind of publicity I've had really from this story, and you kind of forget when you're living it that it is a story. It doesn't feel like a story to you, it just feels like your normal life, but for other people it's really aspirational. And I think what's important for me is there's so much focus in the Highlands. I live on the North Coast 500, so much focus on tourists, and I think it's really, really great to show somebody who's working and living in the Highlands, who's not in the tourist industry, who's not a teacher, who's not a fisherman, who's,
manufacturing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. I've spoken to quite a few of the luthiers, people who build, stringed instruments, and instrument makers living and working in the Highlands. There's quite a lot actually tucked away around the Highlands and Islands who make amazing instruments. And of course they're interesting because they're really the only people in the music industry who sell a physical product anymore. But in that sense, they also have this this benefit from being in a local area. So take a maker like, for instance, our Dival harps in Strathpeffer. So for a lot of their customers, the fact that they're in the Highlands and Islands and that they're drawing on that historical tradition of harp playing in the Highlands and Islands is quite important actually to their customers. And actually most of their customers are overseas. So for the people that are able to mobilise those stories and of the Highlands and Islands and the heritage of it, and then get it onto a digital platform, there's a huge audience beyond the domestic shores for that, as we know from some people who've been doing it, successfully. But yeah.
Yeah, I would also add to that just like using our Highlands and Islands heritage and our culture in a kind of contemporary sense, I also think is a real responsibility and a privilege. As a maker, most of my inspiration comes from, traditional clinker boat building, roof thatching, basketry, which are quite kind of heritage crafts, but bringing them into a contemporary sense, I think is a real privilege for us, and is a real act of storytelling, but hopefully makes it more accessible and contemporary to people who are maybe on the outside looking into our culture and heritage, and I hope keeping it alive in a way.
And I think that's a massive opportunity for creative industries to continue to develop in that space as well, and really help create that modern picture, that modern story of the Highlands and Islands. I know that's something that I'm really committed to. It's something that kind of makes me want to get up and do my job, to be honest. It really makes me want to do it. We've not got much longer left actually, folks. We've only got a few more minutes, but I just want to ask each panel member, so future hopes, our rural region, what can we do creative industries wise? What's the big impact we can make? Oh, what a horrible question to end on, isn't that a big, horrible, nasty question? What do you think, Lomond?
Well, I want ACA football to become a techno, as in music, techno banging hotspot.
Wow.
So that's what I'd quite like to happen.
You heard it here, techno banging hotspot.
I think, well, the thing is, actually, just to go back to the previous point, I don't really have, my work doesn't really draw on the heritage, but I see that as kind of a benefit, actually, because people go, all right, well, he's not based in Brixton, but he's making banging techno hotspot beats.
Love it.
So.
Brilliant. Modern Highlands and Islands. Good stuff. What about yourself, Ishbel?
I think I'm so grateful for where I am right now that it's hard for me to think about what I'd want to change. What I would love is for there to be shared studio spaces in the Highlands for people of different kind of crafts and interests to work. I think if I was in Glasgow or Edinburgh, I'd be able to hop over to a woodwork studio, like an open place that I could try out things. And right now, I'm really lucky that my dad has a little shed in his back garden I can use. But I don't think my mum wants me to take over her living room every time I have a new project. So it would be great to have some shared spaces that lots of different people could come and use.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that one. We moved into, Strategy Story moved into the Inverness Creative Academy about a year ago, WASP, so it's a hub for studio artists and also creative industries business, and it's game changing.
Yeah.
Not just for the opportunity of collaboration and generating new work, but also just being around other creative folk and bouncing off each other and not having that kind of feeling. It kind of brings you together. So okay, more hubs maybe. Great. Simon, final word. And I know you've done so much research on this with lots of international comparisons and all sorts of things.
I mean, there's lots and lots of things that we could be doing. I think top of my list would be looking at income tax or council tax for creative artists. So in Ireland, for instance, anyone earning up to €50,000 doesn't pay income tax if they're a credible, creative artist. They've been doing that since 1969. It would be cost neutral essentially. There's lots of big things like that. Another one would be using non-state solutions, essentially non-publicly funded solutions. Tourist bed taxes are used in North Carolina, for instance, to fund the infrastructure of music tuition and tourism in that whole region. We could be doing that, and the legislation is there now in Scotland for us to do that. It takes the political will to do that. But also I think on the educational side, I think people like me working in universities, but also in schools, I think, I would like to see more of an emphasis on less traditional routes for employment. So for instance, this acknowledgement actually that there are fantastic opportunities to work in the creative arts, making or composing or performing, and actually that more of a focus that right in the middle of the curricula across the schools and universities and colleges would be great.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got a great selection of ideas there for the future, from techno-banging studios through to tweaks in legislation, policy, and raising awareness of education and routes into creative industries.
Well, and we also, earlier on, we spoke about how, I don't know if people noticed how many shops are empty in Fort William, just sitting dormant, and it would be great if there was some kind of policy in place where these shops had to be used, maybe given for free to artists or makers, or very low rent. That'd be an amazing thing to do. So if the funding dries up, which it seems to have done, then at least there could be improvements made in policy to make it much easier to be an artist or maker, designer, musician up in a place like where we live.
Well, hopefully some of the right people are listening to this today and might take some of these ideas forward. But over to the audience for a few minutes just now, folks. If you've got any questions or anything, any insights, ideas, anything you would like. Alex is hovering around with his mic. It's very bright. I can't see you. There you are. There we go.
Thank you. I'm Mark from Loch Harbour Chamber of Commerce.
Hi, Mark.
Hello. Representing a lot of businesses. But actually, just want to pick up on that final comment there about the empty shops. I completely agree with you. And I think, the large space that we've got there in the old church building, which was the old Tesco, could be, for example, a shared creative space, a studio, a gallery even, just to really emphasise the creativity in the Highlands and Islands, or even in Loch Harbour, and bringing it in. So I completely agree with you, and it's something that we have raised to local authority, but actually you've given me the energy there to say it again, so thanks very much.
There you go, and a good testament of the power of working together as well. It's all happening live. Great, thanks very much. Anybody else? No, we all good? We all good? Excellent. All right. Well, folks, that's us. I think you maybe have time for coffee. I'm not sure, but thank you very much. Thank you very much to our panel today. Key message to everybody: get your stories out there. Get those stories of the creative industries out there. And thankfully, there's a panel coming up on that just later on as well. So lots more to come today. AI, crowdsourcing, storytelling. Enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you very much.